There is something that happens to women after 45 that almost nobody talks about openly. Not in doctors' offices, not in women's magazines, not even between close friends who trust each other completely. It starts quietly. So quietly, in fact, that most women don't even recognize it as a problem at first. They just wake up one morning and notice that getting out of bed feels harder than it used to. Their knees feel stiff before they even put their feet on the floor. Their fingers feel swollen, almost like tiny balloons wrapped around each joint. Their lower back protests with every small movement. And there's this dense, heavy fatigue that wraps around their entire body before the day has even started. And what do most women do in that moment? They sigh. They tell themselves it's just age. They take a few extra minutes to stretch, shuffle to the kitchen, pour their coffee, and push through the day like they always have. Because that's what women do. They push through. But here's what I've come to understand after years of observing women's health patterns, after reading hundreds of studies, and after listening to the real stories of women navigating this phase of life. That morning stiffness, those achy joints, that bone-deep fatigue before the day even begins. None of that is just age, and none of it is inevitable. What's actually happening inside the body is far more specific, far more measurable, and far more addressable than most women are ever told. Today, I want to take you through the real science behind why so many women over 45 wake up in pain, and why a surprisingly simple evening habit is quietly changing that experience for thousands of women around the world. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share connects dots that most mainstream medicine has been very slow to put together. Let me ask you something personal. Can you remember the morning when you first noticed it? Maybe it wasn't dramatic. Maybe it didn't feel like a turning point at the time. But there was probably a specific morning, or a series of mornings, where you stepped out of bed and your body gave you a message you couldn't quite ignore. For some women, it's the knees. That grinding, stiff feeling that makes the first few steps down the hallway feel like you're walking on gravel beneath the skin. For others, it's the hands, fingers that feel thick and uncooperative in the early hours, making something as simple as opening a jar or buttoning a shirt feel like a small act of endurance. For many women, it's an all-over sensation, a full-body heaviness, a feeling that overnight, while they were sleeping, something tightened up inside them. Muscles, joints, connective tissue, and nothing fully loosened again by morning. I've heard women describe it in so many different ways. I feel like I aged 10 years overnight. It takes me an hour before I feel like myself. By afternoon I'm okay, but mornings are awful. I used to jump out of bed. Now I have to talk myself into standing up. These aren't exaggerations. These are real descriptions from real women who are experiencing something very real happening inside their bodies. And the heartbreaking part? Most of them were told the same thing by their doctors. This is normal for your age. Take an anti-inflammatory if you need to. Try to exercise more. That's it. That's the full guidance. No explanation of why it's happening. No investigation into the root cause. No acknowledgement of the hormonal shifts that are fundamentally rewriting how the body functions after 45. Just, this is normal. Push through. Here's the thing about what gets called normal in women's health after menopause. Normal doesn't mean unavoidable, and it certainly doesn't mean unexplainable. When we look closely at what's actually happening inside a woman's body during and after the menopausal transition, we find something incredibly specific. Something that explains not just joint pain, but also the fatigue, the sleep disruption, the mood swings, the weight gain around the middle, the brain fog, the low energy, the entire constellation of symptoms that get lumped together and dismissed as just menopause. The key lies in a hormone that most people associate with stress, not menopause. That hormone is cortisol. Now, you've probably heard of cortisol. You might know it as the stress hormone. And yes, cortisol is released when we're under stress. But cortisol does far more than respond to stressful situations. It plays a central role in inflammation regulation, immune function, blood sugar balance, sleep architecture, and, critically, the delicate interplay between other hormones in the body. Here is what the research has been quietly revealing for years. Beginning in our late 40s, Right around the time the menopausal transition begins, cortisol levels start to rise. Not dramatically, not in a way that shows up as an obvious health crisis, but consistently, measurably, and with profound consequences for how the body feels every single day. A study published in the journal Menopause found increased urinary cortisol levels in women during the menopausal transition. Researchers from the University of Washington tracked this pattern across multiple years and found it was consistent and significant. But it's not just that cortisol rises. It's what elevated cortisol does to everything else. Think of your hormonal system as a finely tuned orchestra. Every instrument has a role. Every section communicates with every other section. When one instrument starts playing out of tune, the whole composition begins to unravel. Cortisol, when it rises chronically and disproportionately, begins to interfere with estrogen and progesterone, the two hormones that women are most familiar with in the context of menopause. Research from institutions including Harvard Medical School, the Mayo Clinic, and the Cleveland Clinic has shown that elevated cortisol doesn't just coexist with declining estrogen and progesterone, it actively accelerates their decline. And worse, it causes these hormone levels to fluctuate wildly, spiking and dropping unpredictably from day to day, even hour to hour. This hormonal turbulence is what drives so many of the symptoms women experience as unbearable. The sudden hot flashes, the night sweats that soak through sheets, the inexplicable mood shifts, the crushing fatigue that isn't fixed by sleeping more. But here's where the joint pain and morning stiffness come in. Estrogen, as it turns out, is a powerful anti-inflammatory agent. When estrogen levels are balanced and healthy, they help regulate the body's inflammatory response. They essentially act as a buffer against excessive inflammation in tissues throughout the body, including the synovial fluid that cushions our joints, the connective tissue that holds our muscles in place, and the cartilage that allows bones to move smoothly against each other. When estrogen plummets, and especially when it fluctuates wildly due to cortisol dysregulation, that anti-inflammatory buffer disappears. The result? Inflammation rises. And it rises particularly during the nighttime hours, when the body is in its recovery and repair phase. This is why so many women feel worst in the morning. The inflammation that builds during sleep, without the moderating influence of balanced estrogen, reaches its peak just as the alarm goes off. The body has been struggling to repair and recover all night long, fighting an inflammatory environment it no longer has the hormonal tools to fully manage. That stiffness you feel when you get out of bed, that's not just age. That's measurable biological inflammation that science now has the language to explain, even if your doctor hasn't shared that language with you yet. I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that doesn't get discussed enough in the clinical conversation about menopause. The pain is real, but the way that pain quietly rearranges a woman's life, the things she stops doing, the moments she starts avoiding, the version of herself she slowly lets go of, that might be the most significant consequence of all. I've watched it happen in ways both dramatic and heartbreakingly small. A woman who used to walk every morning stops walking because her knees hurt too much, and the idea of limping through the neighborhood feels humiliating. A grandmother who used to get on the floor and play with her grandchildren starts making excuses not to because she knows she'll struggle to get back up. A woman who loved hiking, dancing, traveling, gardening, all of it starts to feel like it belongs to a previous version of herself, a version she can't quite access anymore. And the cruelest part is how quietly it happens. There's no dramatic moment of giving up. There's just a series of small decisions. Not today, maybe next week. I'm not really feeling up to it. That over time add up to a life that has grown smaller and smaller without anyone quite noticing. Not even herself. And underneath all of it is this corrosive belief that this is just what getting older looks like. That the body she lived in for 4.5 decades has simply decided to stop cooperating. That comfort and mobility are now things of the past. This belief is not the truth, but it feels like the truth when nobody has ever explained what's actually happening, and nobody has ever pointed toward what might genuinely help. Let me shift our focus now to something that I think is genuinely underappreciated in conversations about women's health after menopause, the importance of what happens to the body during the nighttime hours. Sleep is not passive. While you're unconscious, your body is extraordinarily active, running repair and restoration processes that are essential for every system, from immune function to cognitive performance to musculoskeletal health. During deep sleep, the body releases growth hormone, which facilitates tissue repair. It clears metabolic waste products from the brain. It modulates inflammatory cytokines, the signaling molecules that either promote or suppress inflammation throughout the body. It processes and consolidates emotional experiences. It resets cortisol for the following day. This is why sleep quality matters so much, not just for how rested you feel, but for how your body performs at a cellular level. Now here's the critical piece of the puzzle. When cortisol levels are elevated and poorly regulated, which, as we've established, is increasingly common in women over 45, the body's nighttime repair processes are fundamentally disrupted. High cortisol interferes with the release of growth hormone, meaning tissue repair is compromised. It disrupts the regulation of inflammatory cytokines, meaning inflammation is not properly controlled during the night. It interrupts normal sleep architecture, reducing the time spent in deep restorative sleep. And it creates a vicious cycle. Poor sleep leads to higher cortisol the next day, which leads to worse sleep the night after that. The result is a body that wakes up having essentially failed to complete its nightly maintenance. Joints that needed fluid replenishment didn't get it. Muscles that needed repair are still in a state of microinflammatory stress. The nervous system that needed to reset is still running on the biochemical equivalent of yesterday's emergency mode. No wonder so many women wake up feeling worse than when they went to bed. This is the biological reality behind, "I just don't bounce back the way I used to." It's not a vague feeling. It's a measurable disruption of physiological processes that depend on cortisol regulation and hormonal balance to function properly. Here's where the story starts to shift from explanation to possibility. Because once researchers understood the specific mechanism, cortisol dysregulation disrupting hormonal balance, which in turn drives inflammation and impairs nighttime recovery, a natural question followed. What if we could support the body's ability to regulate cortisol more effectively? What if there were natural compounds, studied and documented in peer-reviewed research, that could help the body manage its cortisol response, and by extension, help restore some of the hormonal balance that the menopausal transition had disrupted? And what if those compounds, taken in the evening, could work in concert with the body's own nighttime repair processes to reduce inflammation, improve sleep quality, and allow the joints and muscles to actually recover properly while a woman sleeps? These questions drove a wave of research into a class of plants and herbs known as adaptogens, natural substances that help the body adapt to stress and maintain physiological balance. The results of that research are genuinely fascinating, and they are the foundation of what many women are now incorporating into their evening routine, quietly, without fanfare, often just because they heard about it from a friend or stumbled across the science and decided to try it, and waking up to something they hadn't expected. A body that feels a little more like their own again. If you're a woman over 45 who's been waking up stiff, achy, and exhausted, and you want to understand the full picture of what's happening in your body and what you can actually do about it, the first link in the description has a complete guide that walks through exactly this. It's written for women who are done being told this is just your age and are ready for real answers. Let me walk you through some of the specific natural compounds that researchers have been studying in the context of cortisol regulation, inflammation control, and menopausal health. These are not obscure or untested substances. Many of them have been the subject of randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind clinical trials, the gold standard of scientific research. Ashwagandha has been used in Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years, but what's remarkable is how consistently modern clinical research has validated its effects on cortisol. In a rigorous, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published by the American Nutraceutical Association, a specific concentrated form of ashwagandha was shown to promote healthy cortisol levels significantly better than a placebo, with participants in the active group showing measurable reductions in cortisol-related stress markers. But the downstream effects of that cortisol regulation are what make ashwagandha particularly relevant for women experiencing menopausal symptoms. When cortisol is better regulated, estrogen and progesterone are better able to maintain stability. The wild fluctuations that cause symptoms to swing dramatically from one day to the next, hot flashes 1 hour, chills the next, deep fatigue in the morning, wired and unable to sleep at night, begin to smooth out. In clinical trials, ashwagandha has also been shown to support energy levels, improve mood regulation, enhance concentration, promote deeper and more restorative sleep, and, importantly for our conversation, support joint comfort and reduce muscle soreness. All of these effects trace back to the same root mechanism, helping the body manage cortisol, which allows the hormonal environment to stabilize, which allows inflammation to be properly regulated, which allows the body to actually repair itself during sleep. This is not a supplement that works by masking symptoms. It works by addressing a root mechanism. Most people think of green tea as a source of antioxidants or a gentle energy boost. But certain compounds in green tea, particularly EGCG, epigallocatechin galate, have been the subject of serious research related to cortisol regulation and metabolic function. Studies have shown that EGCG is a potent inhibitor of a specific enzyme, 11V hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1, that is involved in the local conversion and activation of cortisol in tissues throughout the body, including fat tissue and joints. In simpler terms, this enzyme can cause tissues to experience elevated cortisol effects even when blood cortisol levels appear normal. By inhibiting this enzyme, EGCG helps reduce the tissue-level inflammatory effects of cortisol dysregulation. A specific formulation of green tea extract designed for enhanced bioavailability, meaning the body absorbs and uses it far more effectively than standard green tea, has been studied specifically in postmenopausal women. A 60-day supplementation study found meaningful improvements in markers related to adipose tissue dysfunction in overweight postmenopausal women. But beyond the metabolic effects, the cortisol-regulating properties of this compound are particularly relevant for women experiencing joint inflammation and nighttime inflammatory activity. Rhodiola rosea grows in the harsh, cold, mountainous regions of Asia and Europe, and there's a fascinating body of research suggesting it developed unique compounds precisely because it had to survive under extreme stress conditions, and those same compounds help the human body manage stress responses. Research published in the journal Phytomedicine explored rhodiola's interaction with estrogen receptor activity, suggesting it may function as a natural selective estrogen receptor modulator, meaning it can interact with estrogen receptors in ways that support hormonal balance without the risks associated with synthetic hormone therapies. But rhodiola's effects on cortisol regulation are particularly well documented. Studies have shown it helps suppress the cortisol response to stress, both physical and psychological, and that this suppression has cascading positive effects on cognitive function, body temperature regulation, energy levels, mood, and joint comfort. For women whose morning stiffness and joint pain are being driven by overnight inflammation tied to cortisol dysregulation, rhodiola represents a compound with a genuinely relevant mechanism of action. The schisandra berry, sometimes called the five-flavor fruit, because it reportedly contains all 5 primary tastes, has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for centuries and has attracted serious scientific interest in recent decades. What makes schisandra particularly interesting from a research perspective is its dual action. Studies show it not only helps regulate cortisol levels during periods of stress, but also directly supports estrogen and progesterone balance. This combination makes it uniquely relevant for menopausal women because it addresses both the upstream driver of hormonal chaos, cortisol dysregulation, and the downstream hormonal imbalances, declining estrogen and progesterone, simultaneously. Research on schisandra has shown benefits including improved sleep quality, reduction in hot flash frequency and severity, cognitive support and memory enhancement, improved mood stability, energy promotion, and support for joint comfort. One of the most striking findings is how schisandra's effects tend to accumulate over time. Women who track their symptoms over weeks of consistent use often report that the improvements build gradually and then hold, rather than producing a dramatic initial effect that fades. Sage has long been used in folk medicine to manage menopausal discomforts, but it's the clinical research that makes it compelling. An 8-week study published in the medical journal Advances in Therapy, found that a specific dose of sage leaf promoted healthy body temperature regulation in menopausal women, directly addressing one of the most disruptive menopausal symptoms, hot flashes. But sage's relevance extends beyond body temperature. Research shows it supports both estrogen and progesterone activity, which means it contributes to the hormonal environment that governs inflammation regulation, sleep quality, and joint health. The mechanism is believed to involve sage's active compounds binding to estrogen receptors in a way that helps compensate for the reduced circulating estrogen levels characteristic of menopause, essentially helping the body maintain some of the anti-inflammatory hormonal signaling that estrogen would normally provide. Red clover contains isoflavones, compounds structurally similar to estrogen that can interact with the body's estrogen receptors. In a 12-week randomized controlled study published in the Journal of the International Menopause Society, women taking red clover isoflavones reported a 50% reduction in their scores on the official menopause rating scale, a validated assessment tool that covers 11 common menopausal complaints, including joint and muscle discomfort, sleep problems, mood disturbances, and physical symptoms. A 50% reduction across 11 categories of symptoms in 12 weeks. These are not trivial results. These are clinically meaningful improvements in quality of life for women who had been living with these symptoms as their new normal. The researchers described the overall difference as a remarkable improvement in the health and happiness of menopausal women in the treatment group. Black cohosh has one of the longest research histories of any botanical compound studied for menopausal health. Indigenous to the woodlands of eastern North America, it has been used medicinally for centuries and has been studied extensively in modern clinical settings. A meta-analysis examining multiple studies on black cohosh-containing preparations found consistent evidence of its benefits for menopausal symptoms. Additional research published in the journal Climacteric found that black cohosh improved objective sleep measures in postmenopausal women with sleep disturbance. This sleep-related finding is significant in our context because, as we've established, poor sleep quality is a major driver of the nighttime inflammatory activity that shows up as morning joint stiffness and pain. Anything that meaningfully improves sleep architecture has the potential to reduce the inflammatory burden women experience after a night of inadequate restorative rest. Black cohosh's mechanisms include estrogen receptor activity and support for serotonin pathways, which helps explain its effects not just on physical symptoms, but on mood, sleep, and the overall sense of well-being that so many women report losing during the menopausal transition. Most of the conversation around hormonal support for menopause focuses on estrogen, but progesterone matters enormously, and it's often the under-acknowledged partner in hormonal balance. Chasteberry, or Vitex agnus castus, has been shown in multiple clinical studies to support progesterone levels, which helps create the hormonal balance that neither estrogen nor progesterone can achieve alone. An 8-week study assessing menopausal complaints before and after chasteberry supplementation found significantly lower average symptom scores in women taking chasteberry compared to those taking a placebo. Research has also shown chasteberry's ability to promote healthy body temperature regulation, improve mood, support joint comfort, aid in deeper sleep, and reduce breast tenderness, a collection of benefits that maps directly onto the experience of women trying to navigate the menopausal transition with fewer pharmaceutical interventions. Now I want to bring all of this together in a way that actually makes sense as a practical approach. We've established that the root mechanism driving much of the joint pain, morning stiffness, fatigue, and sleep disruption in women over 45 is cortisol dysregulation, which disrupts hormonal balance and drives nighttime inflammation. There are specific, well-researched natural compounds that target this root mechanism by supporting cortisol regulation, by providing gentle hormonal support, and by creating the internal conditions for more effective nighttime repair and recovery. The timing of these compounds matters. Taking them in the evening, before bed, allows them to be active in the body during the nighttime hours when the inflammatory and restorative processes they influence are most active. This is the logic behind what many women are now doing quietly, without great fanfare, as part of their evening routine. It's not a dramatic intervention. It doesn't require a prescription, a medical referral, or a complete lifestyle overhaul. It's a small, consistent practice, taking a combination of these compounds in the evening, that works with the body's natural nighttime processes to support hormonal balance, reduce inflammatory activity, and allow genuine recovery to happen while they sleep. And the experience women report as a result is remarkably consistent. Not that every symptom disappears overnight, not that life is transformed in 72 hours, but that gradually, over days and then weeks, something starts to shift. The mornings feel less brutal. The knees don't protest quite as loudly when they swing their legs over the edge of the bed. The hands move more freely. The fog that used to sit over the first hour of the day starts to lift a little earlier. And then something else happens, something that's harder to quantify, but perhaps more important than any individual symptom. A woman starts to recognize herself again. She starts to make plans she'd stopped making. To say yes to things she'd been automatically saying no to. To walk places she'd started driving because the discomfort wasn't worth it. To get on the floor and play with the grandkids. To plan the trip, to put on the shoes she'd stopped wearing because her feet hurt. These aren't big dramatic moments. They're quiet victories, but they accumulate into a life that feels bigger, more open, more recognizable as her own. If what I've described today resonates with what you've been experiencing, the morning stiffness, the achy joints, the fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, I want you to know that there is a complete explanation and a real path forward. Check the pinned comment below this video. There is a method explained there specifically for women who are tired of waking up every day in pain and are ready to understand what's actually happening in their bodies and what to do about it. I want to take a moment to honor the reality of what it means to live with chronic daily pain that nobody around you fully understands. Because here's the truth. Chronic pain is exhausting in a way that goes far beyond the physical. When you wake up hurting every morning, and you push through the day in discomfort, and you go to bed wondering if tomorrow will be better, and you wake up hurting again, and this cycle repeats for months, for years, something subtle begins to happen to your sense of what's possible. You start to expect pain. You start to organize your life around avoiding it. You start to stop dreaming about the things you used to dream about, because those things require a body that cooperates. And your body hasn't been cooperating. And worse, because this is just menopause and just aging, there's often a social invisibility to the suffering. Nobody expects you to look sick. Nobody offers sympathy the way they might for a visible illness or injury. You're supposed to push through, stay positive, take care of everyone else, and not complain about something that's considered just a normal part of being a woman over 45. This invisibility compounds the pain in ways that are hard to articulate. I've spoken to women who've told me they felt ashamed of how much they were struggling, like they should somehow be handling it better. Like the fatigue and the aching were a personal failing rather than a predictable physiological consequence of hormonal changes that science is only beginning to fully understand. That shame is not earned. Those women, those of you, if this is your story, are not failing at aging. You are experiencing a specific, mechanistically explainable set of physiological changes that have been profoundly underserved by conventional medicine. And the fact that you're still here, still searching, still watching a video like this one hoping to find something that makes sense, that is not weakness. That is resilience. The science around cortisol's role in menopausal health is not static. It continues to evolve, and the picture it's painting is increasingly clear. Research from the Framingham Heart Study found that circulating cortisol was associated with cognitive and structural brain measures, meaning that long-term cortisol dysregulation doesn't just affect joints and sleep, but may have implications for cognitive health over time. Yale University research has shown that stress-related cortisol elevation is specifically associated with excess abdominal fat in otherwise lean women, which helps explain the menobelly phenomenon that seems to appear even in women who haven't significantly changed their eating habits. Ohio State University researchers found that stress and high-fat meals combine to slow metabolism in women, and that this effect is mediated by cortisol, meaning that cortisol dysregulation doesn't just cause fat to accumulate, it slows the body's ability to burn it. And numerous studies have documented the bidirectional relationship between cortisol dysregulation and sleep disruption, each making the other worse in a cycle that, if not interrupted, can persist indefinitely. What all of this research points toward is a coherent picture. Cortisol, which rises during the menopausal transition, sits at the center of an interconnected web of physiological disruptions that touch nearly every aspect of how a woman feels after 45. It's not a single symptom with a single cause. It's a systemic shift with a specific driver. And that driver is increasingly well understood. Here is what I want to leave you with. And I mean this not as a motivational platitude, but as a scientifically grounded statement. The female body, even in its 50s, its 60s, retains significant capacity for recovery and restoration when it receives the right support. The joints that have been aching, they are not broken. The inflammatory environment driving that pain is modifiable. The hormonal disruptions contributing to it are addressable, not through synthetic hormone replacement alone, but through evidence-based support for the natural regulatory systems that have been thrown off balance. The sleep that has been fractured and unrepairing? The architecture of restorative sleep does not permanently change after menopause. When the cortisol dysregulation driving that disruption is addressed, sleep quality measurably improves. And when sleep improves, the overnight repair processes that reduce inflammation and restore tissue function begin to work again. The energy that has been missing, when cortisol is better regulated, when hormonal balance is more stable, when sleep is actually restorative, when inflammation is being properly controlled, energy returns. Not as a side effect of caffeine or willpower, but as the natural consequence of a body that is finally getting the support it needs to function well. The body wants to heal. It wants to restore. It wants to recover. These are not aspirational ideas. They are biological imperatives written into the design of every cell. What so many women over 45 are missing is not the will to get better. It's the specific, targeted support that allows the body's own recovery mechanisms to do what they're designed to do. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine a different morning. Not a perfect morning. Not a morning where you wake up feeling 25 years old again, but a morning where the alarm goes off and you open your eyes and the first thing you notice is absence. The absence of that familiar stiffness in your knees. The absence of that swollen, tight feeling in your fingers. The absence of that heavy, leaden fatigue that sits on your chest before you've even sat up. You put your feet on the floor, you stand up, and for a moment, you just notice. This is easier than it was. Your body moves the way you used to expect it to move. Not perfectly, not without any effort, but normally, cooperatively, like a body that is on your side. You walk to the kitchen and the first few steps don't feel like navigating through concrete. You make your coffee and your hands open the jar without the small, private grimace you'd gotten used to hiding. You look in the mirror and you recognize someone who looks like she slept. Really slept. Someone whose face doesn't carry the weight of another night of struggling through pain and wakefulness. This is not a fantasy. This is what women who have addressed the root mechanisms of their menopausal symptoms describe. Sometimes with disbelief, sometimes with tears, sometimes just quietly, to themselves, on a Tuesday morning when they realize it's been 3 weeks since they dreaded getting out of bed. If you've been waking up every morning feeling like your body is working against you, I want you to understand that there is a specific, evidence-based path toward feeling different. It begins with understanding that what you're experiencing is not random, not inevitable, and not just aging. It has a mechanism. That mechanism is cortisol dysregulation driving hormonal imbalance and nighttime inflammation. And that mechanism can be addressed with specific, well-studied natural compounds. Compounds that work best when taken consistently in the evening, when they can support the body's own nighttime restoration processes. It continues with consistency. The research on these compounds consistently shows that effects build over time. The women who report the most meaningful changes are the ones who committed to daily consistency over weeks, who didn't give up after a few days when the results weren't immediate, who trusted the process long enough to let it work. And it culminates in a version of yourself that you may have started to think you'd lost. A woman who wakes up ready for the day, who moves through the world without the constant undertow of pain and fatigue, who has reclaimed the activities and relationships and simple daily pleasures that chronic discomfort had slowly stolen from her. That woman still exists. She is not gone. She is waiting on the other side of a very specific physiological shift, one that is within reach, accessible, and backed by real science. If today's conversation has connected dots for you, if you've recognized yourself in what I've described, and you're ready to learn more about the specific approach that women are using to wake up pain-free after 45, the full guide is in the first link in the description below. It breaks down the science, the compounds, the dosing, and the process in clear, accessible language, written for women who are done with vague advice and ready for real information. Women have been told for too long that what they experience after menopause is simply the price of growing older, that the aching joints and exhausted mornings and stolen energy are just facts of life that deserve stoic acceptance rather than genuine investigation and meaningful support. I reject that framing entirely. The body of research that exists, from Ivy League institutions, from peer-reviewed journals, from rigorous clinical trials, tells a different story. It tells the story of a specific hormonal mechanism with specific addressable contributors. It tells the story of natural compounds with measurable effects on that mechanism. And it tells the story of women who found their way back to mornings that feel like possibilities rather than obstacles. That story belongs to you too. The science is there. The understanding is there. The path is there. You just needed someone to connect the dots. And now that you have, the next step is yours to take.